I'm still a little in shock, even though it's been over half a year, as I'm sure a lot of you are as well. We held a memorial for her 1 week before Christmas at her beloved house in Vancouver, Washington. We had such a great time. We thought we'd do it again for the people who could not make it, people in Southern California. I will speak more, but right now I'd like to start things off with a tribute to Therese from my brother, Timothy.
My apologies to those of you who have heard this speech before up north, but most of you were not up north, so I figured it was okay to do the speech again. It is impossible to convey in words the love one has for one's mother or the feelings one has after she is gone. Poems can be written if they are not too difficult to write, and speeches can be declaimed if the speaker can manage to speak. As difficult as it is, almost everyone has experienced their mother's death or will experience it unless they die before their mother, and that is worse. My mother was born in 1930 to a huge Canadian family. She loved her parents almost to the point of worship. Her realm was the household and domesticity. She loved babies more than anything and desired to have her own babies with the same ardor with which other teenagers anticipate the activities required for pregnancy. That was a joke. If you didn't catch the joke, you might want to pay attention. She practiced Catholicism, but then mostly stopped after the last child moved out of the house, later revealing to me that she had retained the religion partly because she wanted a framework in which to raise children, but had stopped believing in much of it. The thing that my mother contributed most admirably was a sense of proportion, moderation, self-control, and what may be reasonably defined as common sense. Her only extravagances were deluxe varieties of honey, sometimes with nuts. The only things in her life that she did not share happily with others. Sometimes her sense of moderation paradoxically reached extremes. For example, when my father and I went to Turkey for a historical and archaeological tour, which turned out to be the best time of my life, my mother suggested that we should instead read a book about Turkey with photographs. We went anyway, despite this sage advice. The Dorans have sadly gained an unfortunate reputation for seeming sometimes somewhat snobby. I'm sure this will be a huge surprise to everyone here. Dad hated rock music, thinking it garbage. Dad made constant references in regular conversations all the time to anyone. References to Shakespeare, Edgar Allan Poe, and Charles Dickens. And he corrected our grammar. We all loved reading. We hated playing team sports. We all loved knowledge. All of us criticized social institutions that we thought were foolish. We all hated Fox News. And we all criticized organized religion. My mother agreed with some of the points we made, but never understood our vehemence and thoroughly disapproved of our tendency to think the worst of those who disagreed with us. She saw our scorn as counterproductive and unchristian. Hence, my mother was a yardstick of reasonableness at all times. She gave a sense of proportion to the Doran family. She was an anchor keeping us on earth so that we did not float away into the clouds. The best way to describe my mother is that she was there. She was always present in a way that some parents are not. This word, there, T-H-E-R-E, happens to comprise the first 5 letters of her name, Therese. Therese was there at all times. She was there for us, there for our problems, there for our successes, and there for our excesses. She was always there for us and for her beloved siblings, nieces, nephews, and friends. Ready to listen and sympathize, to be there for everyone all the time is not easy. I cannot do it. I shush people so that I can concentrate. My wife may have noticed this once or twice. My children may have noticed it 2 or 3 times also. But my mother seldom shushed anyone. She wanted them around. And when they were not present, she gazed longingly at their images on her wall of photographs in the kitchen. 2016 was a year of losses. Pierre Boulez, David Bowie, Muhammad Ali, Prince, Alan Rickman, Harper Lee. And I think most of us did read To Kill a Mockingbird in high school. Harper Lee, losing her was kind of a big deal. John Glenn, one of the names that will be remembered in human history, okay? John Glenn. Florence Henderson, maybe not of the same achievements as John Glenn, but still living in our hearts in a certain special way. Nancy Reagan, Gene Wilder, Leonard Cohen. I forgot that Leonard Cohen had died until I looked it up to make sure that this speech was correct. The victims of the Orlando gay nightclub shooting, and figures lesser known in the USA, such as the Polish politician Zbigniew Zichowicz, Marshal of West Pomerania. But to add insult to injury to my own family, my father died on August 3rd, and then my mother, less than 48 hours after the election of a certain someone about whom the Dorans have a somewhat difficult time feeling happy. Yet the world still continues to turn, although heating dramatically. Therese Doran, always there for us, always bravely standing by us, in support of everyone. She may be gone, but she is still with us in our hearts and memories. May she always remain there. Thank you.
My name is Mark Muir, and my relationship to Therese was that I was her son-in-law. There is a phrase that swirled through my mind over the last while as I contemplated the talk I was to give today. And essentially it was, I got really lucky. Therese Doran was my mother-in-law. When I first met Therese, it was in 1999, Marianne had had a somewhat checkered past with men. Her brothers gave me the stink eye. Her father, who I think was under very, very, very strict guidelines as to how to treat me, spent the first 2 hours of my acquaintance with him going through his binders on being a clown and music and everything, because it was the best he could do. And I've always given him credit for that. But then there was Therese. And Therese and I are nothing alike in many respects. I love education. Did we ever find out whether she had finished high school?
She was a nurse.
She finished high school. And then nursing school.
Yeah.
You know, I know she went on to nursing school. There was some question at some point. But that wasn't a big part of her life, despite having a professor as a husband. And as Tim has noted, she wasn't much for travel, and I adore travel, and Marianne did too. So in a lot of respects, we were very different. But in other respects, especially at the start, we were able to slide into a very comfortable relationship together, which I always appreciated. We could always laugh, talk. She would pretend to eat my squash recipes, despite the fact that she hated squash for some reason. And she trusted me. I still remember the very first Christmas that Marianne and I spent up in Vancouver, when Marianne and I volunteered to do the big Christmas Eve dinner. And Therese didn't fight it, she didn't hover. She went into the living room and read a book. She trusted us. Well, she trusted Marianne, and I was sort of a hanger-on. But then there came a very dramatic change in our relationship when Marianne was diagnosed with cancer. And for the next 6 years, Therese and I worked together to try and keep Marianne alive. No one was closer to that effort outside of Marianne and myself than Therese. And she and I schemed together, talked about treatment options, went over all sorts of things. We never had an argument. We always came to an agreement. She was always deeply supportive. And she was a nurse. She knew a lot more about this subject than I ever will. But we were able to work out really good common ground that continues to mean a lot to me through the years. Although I do have to tell you, one story from that time that illustrates a side of her character. She can always sort of look on the dark side of things. And so we got this one report on breast cancer, and Marianne and her mom went through it and were devastated. They sent me down to talk about how terrible it was and you know, the black clouds that were on the horizon. I said, let me see that report. So I went off and spent a couple of days going through it with my yellow highlighter. And I highlighted all the parts that were optimistic. And I took them back to Marianne and Therese and said, I think you guys missed some parts. Because there was actually a lot there that was quite good. And Marianne actually did live significantly longer than the statistics would suggest. But Therese and Marianne both looked at it and said, we never read this. You know, somehow that just wasn't in their personality to see sometimes the bright side of things. A couple of months before Marianne died, Therese came down to help, and was so much help that summer. But we also had fun. It turned out she and I both liked watching war movies, and one of my favorite memories of Therese is sitting there watching A Bridge Too Far with her while Marianne slept. And we had a great conversation about it. And when we needed to get the medical orders signed and medical power of attorney, Marianne had a great idea. She said, well, you know, I kept asking her, we got to sign this stuff, we got to go over. And she said, finally, I'm uncomfortable having all the attention focused on me. Let's make it a party and invite people. This is one of the brightest ideas I ever heard. And so we did, and Therese and Julie, you were there. And we all went through it at the same time, so the focus wasn't on Marianne, but Therese, again, was so helpful with a mature understanding, having seen many people exit this earth, of what needed to be done. It was just, it was a remarkable help at a very tough time. So what I wanted to leave you with is a portrait of somebody who was uncharacteristically kind. She wasn't adventuresome, but she had a really good sense of humor. Or maybe it was just that she would always pretend to laugh at my jokes, but she at least tried. She was always there, and she was the glue that held that family together for a long, long time. So when I tell people that I had a mother-in-law, my feeling always is, I got really, really lucky.
Annabelle Lee. And this maiden she lived with no other thought than to love and be loved by me. I was a child and she was a child in this kingdom by the sea. But we loved with a love that was more than a love, I and my Annabelle Lee. With a love that the winged seraphs of heaven coveted her and me. And this was the reason that long ago, in this kingdom by the sea, a wind blew out of a cloud, chilling my beautiful Annabelle Lee, so that her highborn kinsman came and bore her away from me, to shut her up in a sepulchre in this kingdom by the sea. The angels, not half so happy in heaven, went envying her and me. Yes, that was the reason, as all men know in this kingdom by the sea, that a wind came out of the cloud by night, chilling and killing my Annabelle Lee. But our love was stronger by far than the love of those who were older than me, of many far wiser than me. And neither the angels in heaven above nor the demons down under the sea can ever dissever my soul from the soul of the beautiful Annabel Lee. For the moon never beams without bringing me dreams of the beautiful Annabel Lee. And the stars never rise, but I feel the bright eyes of the beautiful Annabel Lee. And so all the night tide I lay down by the side of my darling, my life and my bride, in the sepulchre that by the sea, entombed by the sounding sea. Smile can light up a room. Her presence is of grace. Her opinions are heard without one word if I look upon her face. Her touch is so gentle. Her spirit is kind-hearted and warm as a summer's afternoon. Her hair a river of gray. Her eyes radiate as the sun. Her time she'll take, no matter how long, until the work is done. Her kisses are so soft. Her hugs preferred from the rest. My granny is mine forever and ever, and she'll always be the best.
Great, I have to follow. Why couldn't you put me earlier in the program? My name's Laura DeRoca. I'm Charles's wife, one of Therese's daughters-in-law. So I'm going to say a little bit about my mother. I feel fortunate to have had 3 mothers in my life. First, and of course most important, my own mother, who brought me into this world, who will forever take care of me, and to whom I'll always be known as her baby. My aunt, a high school teacher who spent many of her summer vacations living with us and watching my brother and I. Among her many wonderful qualities, she was hilarious, a creative playmate, and a fellow baby sister, like me. And Therese, who from the first moment we met, embraced me as her daughter. The first time we met was my first trip to Washington with Charles, after we'd been dating for about 6 months. No pressure. We arrived at Matt and Therese's home in Vancouver, where I was warmly greeted. Therese gave me a huge smile and a big hug, which immediately set my mind at ease. She said that although we had just met, she felt like I was her second daughter. And I seem to recall at some point during that first encounter, her asking me how I put up with Charles. So of course that immediately won me over. No offense, Charles. I also remember during that first trip, Charles, Matt, Therese, and I decided to have a picnic at a park near Lake Vancouver. It was an absolutely beautiful setting, and Therese made a fabulous picnic. All of a sudden, a Pacific Northwest storm rolled in, and the picnic quickly turned into us gobbling up Therese's delicious sandwiches as we stood huddled under umbrellas and laughing as thunder struck. Of course, one cannot talk about Therese without talking about her home, which undoubtedly was her castle. I'd heard from Charles stories about the many, welcome. About the many moves the family made during her time in Southern California. Clearly, Therese found her true home in Vancouver, where she and Matt lived for 20 years. When I first saw it, I thought, wow, what a huge house for a retired couple. But it quickly became clear to me that she wanted enough space for all the visiting friends and family who would come. I have a house filled with people, and understood how my own mom must have loved living so close to her aunts and cousins in New Orleans. Teresa was happiest in her home, which was so often filled with visitors, including her fabulous sisters and their extended families. Food prepared by Therese for her guests included her famous dessert trays and scrumptious soups. I'll never forget being warmly greeted during Christmas time visits with bowls full of warm soup, followed by trays and tins full of desserts, one that, much to my waistline's chagrin, were constantly being replenished. I'll always remember mornings with Therese during our visits. Practically every morning I was greeted with a warm hug and kiss on the cheek, each morning as if she had seen me for the first time in years. And she would ask, "How did you sleep? I hope you slept well. Was the mattress too hard?" Therese was always concerned about others and their comfort. Food and meals factored prominently into any visit to Therese's home. Breakfast was a time to share conversations. Therese often recounted stories from her past in Montreal with her many sisters, brothers, and her beloved Meme and Pepe. Coming to Los Angeles as a young woman and meeting Matt for the first time at a dance. But a memory that always brings a smile to my face is hearing her say on many mornings that breakfast was her bête noire, her black beast, a huge thorn in her side. She never knew what to do for breakfast, and it was the one meal where everyone was on their own. Often that meant sons fixing eggs and bacon, or groups of early rising overachievers making Therese's famous crepe recipe. She would always say with an incredulous expression, "Why would anybody want to go to all this trouble for breakfast?" Lunches usually consisted of her many creative salads, grilled cheese, and or one of her famous soups. Again, the dessert tray made an appearance. There was no hope for my waistline on these trips. And then there was dinner, where Matt's proclamation was often heard, "Therese, this is the best meal I've ever had." At some point in our relationship, I learned that she actually hated cooking, but somehow she managed to do it for years for a huge family and many, many house guests. Dinner was almost always followed by a round of Doran family games. I learned that Therese, despite English being her second language, was a formidable Boggle opponent. And she held her own against the competitive Doran men, except when she drew the line at playing an ear-piercing round of pit. And of course, there's no way that I could speak about Therese without talking about her love of babies, especially newborns and children through the age of 2. I've never met anyone who loved babies so much. I have fond memories of her talking about her time spent working in a hospital nursery, which I'm sure were among the happiest of her life. When Charles and I took a special trip up to Vancouver, which we slyly planned to coincide with Father's Day in 2009, to announce that I was pregnant, everyone at first was shocked. We'd been dating for many years, and I think most people had given up hope that it would ever happen. Needless to say, Therese was thrilled. Thrilled to be having another grandchild, another baby to help take care of. It was during that time that I wished we lived closer. Therese was always available during my pregnancy, after our son Miles's birth, and throughout the years to take frantic phone calls from me with questions and to respond to my emails venting about being a new mother. She was also there to share the happiest moments and deepest sorrows of motherhood and caring for a baby. Always one to be empathetic, especially when it came to babies, Therese was always also very practical and could be very direct, especially when it came to babies. I'll never forget one of our first phone calls to her after we brought Miles home from the hospital. He had been an angel in the hospital and during our first day home, but that all changed at 2 o'clock in the morning. He slept practically all day and waited until early in the morning to start wailing. We did everything we could think of and finally decided to call Therese. She was very sad for us and gave us every piece of advice she could think of, but then in her very practical and direct way said, "Can't you call your pediatrician?" Therese loved all of her grandkids unconditionally. She loved holding them and reading to them. She made the most beautiful sweaters and quilts, some on display. While we've passed down most of Miles's clothes and toys, these things we will always cherish. One of my favorite memories of her as a grandmother is the first time she met Miles. We took a trip up to Vancouver when Miles was 4 months old. As soon as we walked into the door, Therese had a huge smile for him. The rest of us were barely visible in that moment. She immediately asked if she could hold him and feed him. Without hesitation, I said, "Yes, please." There was nothing better than the thought of Miles in Therese's capable and loving arms. And so today, we celebrate the life of Therese Bernuy Doran, our mother, sister, grandmother, and friend. My third mother. I wish I'd had more time with her, sitting at her table, sharing stories and meals, and watching her marvel over the growth of her grandchildren. We love and miss you, Therese.
I was gonna do my talk as a letter to Therese. So I'm gonna say, "Dear Therese, you were about 9, I think, when I was born. I was the youngest in the family. I was the very youngest in the family.
Good.
I was the youngest, and she was so delighted. You were delighted, Therese. I know you were delighted. You've told me this many, many times, to have another little sister to take care of, and she didn't even know I was coming. In those days, mothers hid that really well. And then, of course, I came, I think, under a cabbage leaf or something.
Probably.
Oh, anyway, dear Therese, we finally got to know each other when we were living, the two of us together, at the very top of our house on Chesley, and everybody else had gotten married, disappeared, and she was going off dancing, and I think I was in high school, and she was giving me great advice on dating, of course. She would say, "Now, Louise, boys are going to want to kiss you right away. You do not kiss them unless you love them." And so I had a lot of very disappointed suitors. But anyway, she was just wonderful to be sharing that room with. And then, of course, once I was married and started having children, we had so much, we were the same age, really. We became the same age. And Therese, I forget how far away she lived. I lived more like near UCLA, and she lived on Bradna, which is like Crenshaw, Slauson area. And whenever my husband was out of town, which was pretty often, I'd say, Therese, can I come over? And first it was with one child. Then it was with 2 children. Then it was with 3 children. And she would all say, sure, come over. And so we really, really bonded that way. It was just wonderful. She took care sometimes of one of my children while I was left. And I took care of her, Matt, poor Matt, while she was gone to Europe for 3 months. And I didn't have any experience with I'm so sorry, Therese. I didn't really do as much as I could have for Matt. He's not here today, so I don't have to worry too much. But he was a really darling little boy, but I just had a little girl that was like, I think 6 or 7 months old. So for me, it was really a lot to have 2. So it wasn't all that great. But anyway, we outlived all that. And when we moved up to the Northwest, she and Matt started looking up there, and they ended up, thank you, moving up to Vancouver, Washington, and which was a lot closer than Los Angeles. It was only 3 hours for me to drive to her house. And every time I came, you welcomed us, Therese. You said, "I'm so happy you're here. Thank you for coming." And we were coming. So, "Thank you for receiving." No, thank you for coming. This is so wonderful. And so she became kind of the stopping off point. While we went on, we had a daughter in Oregon, and it would be like 3 hours to Teresa's, 3 hours to our daughters. And she would feed us, give us a bed, and then she'd say, "Thank you. Thank you for coming." So I just felt so blessed always. And she became really my rock. And every time I had something that was going wrong or that I felt bad about, I could call her and she would, give me advice or just compassionately, understand what was going on. So then, unfortunately, sitting at her table, like Laura said, was just always so wonderful. Sharing meals with her, talking philosophy, theology, religion, all that stuff, and husbands. Talked about husbands a lot. She really helped me a lot with that. So, unfortunately, Therese got sick in the middle of the night, as the same night that Trump was elected, and the same night that my husband had a full seizure. And we've had very big problems ever since for the 6 months. And then she died the very next day. I had to leave him in the hospital to try and go and say goodbye. She was already unconscious. And this morning, as I was thinking about talking about her today, I thought, why did you leave when I needed you? I needed her so badly. And now I talk to her, I do talk to her, and she's always saying, okay, you can do it, and it's gonna be okay. Everything is happening exactly the way it should. That was her mantra. Everything is happening the way it should. Yeah, right. Thank you. Anyway, her generosity of spirit and her love and her embracing of my children too, and of me and my husband, it was always just a welcoming home, which is so sadly now gone, and my rock is gone. So I wanted to read you this little poem that someone wrote, that no one famous, but it's someone who's had a loss. It's called Dancing in the Sky. What does it look like in heaven? Is it peaceful? Is it free, like they say? Does the sun shine bright forever? Have your fears and your pain gone away? 'Cause here on earth, it feels like everything good is missing since you left. And here on earth, everything's different. There's an emptiness. Oh, I hope you're dancing in the sky, and I hope you're singing in the angels' choir. I hope the angels know what they have. I bet it's so nice up in heaven since you arrived. Now tell me, what do you do up there? Are your days filled with love and light? Is there music? Is there art and invention? Tell me, are you happy? Are you more alive? 'Cause here on earth, it feels like everything good is missing since you left. And here on earth, everything's different. There's an emptiness. Oh, I hope you're dancing in the sky, and I hope you're singing in the angels' choir, and I hope the angels know what they have. I bet it's so nice up in heaven since you arrived. So, this is it. I've cried a lot. I would get in my car and I would just scream and weep. And I would write to people and say, tell me it's not even true. Tell me it's not true. And every once in a while I think, I'm going to go see Therese now. I'm just going to get in the car and go see Therese. It's gone. But her spirit is still here. Her spirit is still with us. And I really can talk to her. And one day when I was so sad and crying and saying, why did you leave? Why did you leave? I really felt her. I actually physically felt her embracing me. And it was just the most wonderful feeling that you could imagine. And that has happened once, but I know that most of you have known her and how wonderful and welcoming and loving she always was. And I'm so glad that you came here to celebrate with us. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your amazing tributes. Beautiful. And thank all of you, everyone, for coming again. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah. A little over 10 years ago, actually right here at my sister's beautiful memorial, I remember getting up here and saying that the only thing Marianne would have regretted would be that she couldn't physically be present with all the wonderful people who were there. I know my mother, Therese, would feel the same way. As we can see from the books, the photograph collages, family and friends meant more to her than anything else. Of course, while that is certainly true, if Therese were here, I know exactly what she'd say. What are you all doing here? Charles, how much money did you spend? You could have just had a picnic in the park. Growing up in the Doran household, and I think Tim would agree with me here, I don't think there was 1 month when we didn't have relatives or friends from France, Canada, or most likely parts of the US, spending an evening or 3 or 4 with us. We grew up enjoying the company of the extended family and friends who would pay a visit. I can recall many nights playing games like charades or Tripoli or Boggle or Pit, and people screaming their heads off, having fun. At least I hope it was fun. Therese continued hosting family and friends after she and my father moved to Vancouver, Washington for the last 20 years of their life. Nothing, as people have said over and over again today, nothing made my mother happier than when her children, her siblings, her cousins, her friends would come by for an extended visit. Therese went to nursing school, as we know, in Montreal. She always felt the need to care for people. Caring for 5 children apparently was not enough. She continued to care for children when she started a daycare business in our Brentwood Glen home in the late 1970s. The mothers, 2 of whom are here today, who dropped off their babies were ecstatic with Therese's tender, loving care and heartbroken when their kids reached the 2-year-old cutoff and were told they needed to find another provider. Therese loved those children as her own and stayed friends with many of these families for years. I saw firsthand another example of my mother's amazing care. In the early 90s, when I was living with my parents in Van Nuys, Therese paid a visit to our grandmother, Mame, in White Rock, British Columbia. My mother returned from the visit looking distraught. She told us Meme was not doing well, that she was in failing health. Therese told my father she wanted to bring Meme back home to live with us. Later, she told me privately that she thought Meme would only have about 6 months left to live. Meme flew down to LA and was bedridden immediately. I heard her talking to a family friend in a weak voice, asking him about life after death. The outlook seemed grim, but it really wasn't. Under my mother's care, Meme slowly got better. Her infections went away, she ate great food, and began walking more and more every day. I had a Siamese cat that liked to jump on her bed, because cats always like to be with the one person who doesn't want them around. And Meme was strong enough to pick up my cat and wordlessly hand her over to me. I remember watching some music videos one day on TV, and LL Cool J came on. Meme watched this video with strange fascination, and then started dancing, trying to imitate his moves. Clearly, she was on the mend. Family members came by to visit, and once again, I could hear happy laughter coming from the house. Meme survived not only 6 more months, but about 6 more years, all thanks to the great care her daughter, Therese, gave her. Thank you.
I'm Theresa's big sister, little sister. And when Theresa was born, I was already 7 years old. And so when the doctor came, he said, Helen, have you placed an order for a baby sister? And I said, oh, yes. And he said, did you want blonde hair? And I said, yes. And blue eyes? Of course. And so then there was Theresa, the most beautiful baby in the whole world. And because I was the oldest of the sisters, she got to be my baby, my baby. Is it true Theresa is gone? It can't be, it just can't be.
Hello, I'm Jean Goodyear, and I'm Teresa's niece. and one of her biggest fans. And as one of 35 cousins on my mom's side of the family, most of us didn't have too much money, but we used to swap cousins in the summertime. I think a lot of you remember that, where it seemed like we were there for the whole summer, but I think it was only maybe a month or something like that. So I would go to the Doran's house, and they'd send one of their kids to our house. The boys would go to Simi Valley, and I'd be in Santa Monica or something like that. And I remember one of the trips I was there at the house, I can't remember the name of the street, but somewhere in Santa Monica. And I was a collector of pet mice. Yeah. Did you know that? No. And so I had some at my home in Simi, but I decided that summer to maybe see if I could have a few at the Doran's home. And I remember saying, all I need is like this little tiny aquarium about this big, and a little water bottle, and just some little pellets, and I could have the mice in Marianne's room with me. But I can't remember really having the mice there, so I have a feeling they sort of nixed the idea. It was a great time being with Marianne. Marianne was just a little couple years younger than me, and I never had a sister, so she was like a sister to me. So we had a great time together. And I remember at the Doran's house, at the dinner table, they would always, right after dinner, play all kinds of fun games. And they used to play this game called Dictionary, and they'd pull out this big fat dictionary, and one person, as I recall, would be in charge of writing down some words, and they'd have like 3 or 4 real words, and one was like a fake word, I think, or something like that. And then each person had to write a definition of the word and convince everybody else it was the real word, or something like that. Wasn't that the way it was that you guys played that game? So the Dorans were so brilliant, because they were a bunch of bookies compared to our family. Was like the outdoor family. Their family was the book family. And they knew so much. They knew these words, and they were able to put these fake descriptions. They fooled everybody. I could never figure out which was the real word and which was the fake word. So many great memories. And then when I was in my early 20s, I was living in San Diego, and I had to come up to LA to take this insurance course, because I was becoming an insurance agent. So I had to pass this test and take this class, and I stayed overnight that night with the Dorans. They were close by at the time. And I just remember sitting down at the kitchen table with Therese, and she was like no one else I knew, that when she was talking to you, I should say when she was listening to you, you were the most important person in the world. Do you remember that about her? She would look at you and listen and ask questions, and it was all about you. And it wasn't like she was jumping in with her own story of something that happened to her, just about the same situation like I do when people tell me a story. She would just be there for you, just listen to you, just be so kind and so loving and so caring in that soft voice. Just love that about her. It's a rare quality, really, to be a good listener. You meet very few people, I think, that really care, really listen, and are so loving. And those cookies she would make, unbelievable. She was the best cook. She always had a great recipe, always was so welcoming, and I really miss her. Thank you.
I wasn't planning to say anything, because I feel like I always come up and I say something and then I start crying. My sister is working with me on presenting context, so here I am. My name is Joanna. I am the wife of Timothy, who is the youngest son of Therese, so she was my mama. I guess I just wanted to share that it seems to me that the way that my parents-in-law have passed, it reminds me very much of the way that they lived their lives. In the sense that Matt, he had even though he was declining, he still was always able to find, he was always enwrapped with like little newspaper clippings that he would put in and organize. He was trying to reorganize everything, and he continued to always love food, and it seemed to me as if he was holding on because he really loved all those things that he was able to immerse himself with. It's like he had so much joy being kind of within himself, and and experiencing all these things, and sometimes coming out to talk to people. But when it comes to Maman, she wasn't like that. She was always engaged, and just like Jeannie was saying, she was always there for you. Always. And then even when she would talk about, she never wanted to draw attention to herself. She was always taking care of others, and so much so that it seems to me that the way that she died, the way that she passed, was very much like her. She is exactly the kind of person that if she had to go, she's just going to get it over with really quick. It's going to happen before you know it. She's not going to announce it. She's gone before you know it, and then that's it. It's no complication, no fuss. Most of all. And I think that I've been in denial for quite a while about her passing, because I felt so much that she's with us. It's almost as if by insisting that she is still with us, then I am holding on to her. But I feel as if there's any possibility of somebody being with a group of people who really love them, it's her, and right now. Thank you.
Charles had asked me if I would speak, and I politely declined because I've just had enough of Durans leaving this earth. I didn't know if I could hold it together. So I just wanted to say that as I look at these pictures and I see Marianne and her mom there, I realize even more how being the wonderful person that Therese was, how she created these amazing kids, 1 female and 4 male. And I remember blackberries. I remember a lot of things, but I remember blackberries up in Vancouver. Marianne and I would pick them, and then Therese the next morning would have these blackberry muffins that were just to die for. So yeah, food was a theme always. But I just want to say this, that as I look at what you have done here at Charles, and I watch what you've done for the family members who've passed, you've really got your mom's spirit, and it's so beautiful. And she's so proud of you, and of you too. So, I'm done.
As a nephew of Therese, I had an interesting experience that some in the family knows of, and I can give a perspective on. I knew her, of course, as my aunt for many years, but got close to her when I shared the house of the paternal grandfather on Brynhurst, and I was all of 22 years old and knew less than nothing, of course. And I worked at a hardware store, and when they changed a bunch of stuff at the hardware store, they said, well, we got all this paint equipment we're throwing out, and I thought, oh, this is so wonderful. And so I brought the paint equipment to the house, and I said, I'm gonna paint this beautiful mural down this hall, and I could not imagine why people didn't like this. and Therese and Matt years later said, what did he do this for? And I thought, nobody told me to get rid of it. I had all this wonderful paint equipment. I could have painted the house any way they wanted, and nobody said anything about it. But it was a wonderful experience. I was there for the better part of a year, as I recall anyway, and enjoyed it immensely. Got to see Matt and some of you sons of his every week or so as you come by the house there. So it was a wonderful experience, and a wonderful place with all kinds of beautiful koi ponds in the back and all kinds of neat things, and a great experience there that few others could enjoy as I did. Thank you.
I've been a sister of social service for most of my life, so I don't have all the same memories. but she was just younger than I, and so we had a closeness. And I didn't live that close to her, but oh, this doesn't work. This didn't work for most people, I noticed.
Yeah, it works.
Now, can you hear me better? Oh, you missed all the best part. Anyway, I've been a sister of social service since I was 21. At the time my sisters were getting married at that age, I became a sister of social service. And it is a wonderful community. And I loved my life with them. But it kept me somewhat more separated from my family. But now you're in this beautiful place, which is a Sisters of Social Service place. And I'm going to be in this place for the rest of my life. Am I lucky? Yes. What can I say? She was just younger than I, my sister Teresa. We went to school together at one time, even when we were in a special school that we loved, both of us. They had a mixture of things. And now I work with One Generation. Some of you may have heard of that. And several times a week they ask me, among others, to come and we work with the children. Friday, it was a fun day. You'd think we were the children. It was just a fun day all day. They did all kinds of things for us, and we didn't have to work at anything. They didn't ask us to wash the dishes or anything. So in a way, I missed my sister. What could I do? I belonged to another community. But, it was close to my heart. And I felt her loss very much, as many of you did.
Met Edmund in 1978, I think it was, when we had a job together at the phone company, and he introduced me to his wonderful family and brought me over for dinner. And I remember these wonderful dinners with Therese. I remember these babies in the daycare center. I remember something really strange that I wasn't used to in my own family. They'd be at dinner talking to each other and having conversations and asking how everyone was doing. And I remember, Therese was just so warm. And I felt like she was my mom, Felt that she would have been my mom. And remember that she was so tolerant. It's interesting to hear that she didn't believe much in religion after a while.
Not much.
But, and I don't know anything about religion, but she seemed like the epitome of Christianity in the way she behaved. I remember she was really tolerant. And I had the privilege of living with Emmett for a little bit as a roommate, but he kicked me out. We didn't work together because he didn't like Slavs. But I had better luck with Matt for a while. We did great in Charles. And, that worked out really good. And but this guy Tim, I would mostly hear about him in the background because I don't know, it was something associated with possible antisocial behavior or something like that. It wasn't anything like being a Republican. So it wasn't that bad. But it's like, the thing I remember from her was just tolerance, like everything's gonna work out, and it did. So that's the thing I'm left with, just the tolerance that everything's gonna be okay, and the kind of reassurance, and I remember that from the whole family, which I'm grateful for being associated with to some extent, but that's what I remember about her. Thanks.
And my mom thought that was kind of crazy. She didn't like to see her son piercing his flesh. But keep in mind, since she was a nurse, I used rubbing alcohol. There was a 0% chance of any infection because I took her medical knowledge very seriously. I also had a gigantic mohawk. I was listening to a lot of punk rock. I still do like punk rock, although I don't have the kind of in my heart that makes me want to listen to it very often, okay? But, and she thought that music was pretty crappy. But this brings us back to the notion of her tolerance and her ability to see the bright side of everything. This is where I think she retained the aspects of Christianity that we all really do admire, the idea of compassion and charity and the idea of Jesus' words, because we've sort of danced around the ideas of religion a little bit in the last hour or so, and this is where she really had a sense of this kind of Christ-like, beautiful tolerance and compassion for other people. This is where I think she really kept a beautiful version of Christianity, deep inside, even though she kind of stopped going to church, okay? And the funniest sort of thing was that one day she finally, I guess, got used to the mohawks and all that stuff, because one day my hair was a blonde mohawk. It was bleached blonde. And she said, and I sprayed it with Aquanet Extra Super Hold. or I would put it up with egg whites. Those were gross because they smelled bad. Or I would use Knox unflavored gelatin to make it stick straight up. This was at least 8 inches long, okay? And it was bleached blonde, and finally she said one day, that's actually very beautiful. It looks like the sun.